It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
And we're back. Giving and receiving feedback, getting bad news, delivering bad news, criticism, things like that is what we're going to talk about. But first, podcasters, introduce yourselves. Say hello.
Hi, I'm Elstura.
Hello, I'm Chad Jetner.
All right, joining us today, special guest, our marketing director, formerly a consultant manager, formerly a traffic manager, and other things. Clare Patera. Welcome, Clare.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Wait for the cheering to subside and we can get going. All right. So I'm currently working on a project where I need to show things to people and ask them what they think. And then they tell me. And then I have to go take a nap. Yeah.
Then you start wondering, why did I even ask for feedback?
Rocking. Yeah. After being destroyed, I have to get over it. And then I have to go read it. Because the first time through is like you get stunned by it because they didn't just love everything that you did. Yeah, it's like, oh, darn. Yeah. But then as you go along working with people, getting more and more feedback, like you get used to it then. You get to understand kind of where they're coming from. So it's if you're working with somebody for 6 months and they deliver you feedback once a week, like week 1 and 2 are going to be the worst. But then by the end of it, it's just like business as usual. So what is your technique for delivering negative feedback, AKA constructive criticism or bad news? Chad.
I usually, as comically as possible, right? Like, hey, remember that time you did that really, really, really horrible thing? Yeah, that was like 5 minutes ago. Let's not do that again. But no, I mean, it's if you have to do it, there's a way to do it where you don't necessarily hurt feelings, and you can do it in a way that, lands but doesn't sting, right? And I usually do that with jokes and being a little less serious about it because it's not necessarily getting negative feedback isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just sometimes delivering that message. You can absolutely deliver negative feedback in a horrible way that doesn't resonate and doesn't. The intended effect is some sort of improvement, and if you deliver it the wrong way, you're not going to get the desired effect. You're going to get just resentment, hurt feelings, and
Elle, how do you do it? What's your technique?
I try to think about what I hope the outcome is. So there are times when I think about, going to a restaurant, for example, and if I was asked to give a review of the restaurant, yeah, there might be critical feedback, but I would want the restaurant to be better for knowing that information. And so I think to Chad's point, you don't give, or hopefully you don't give feedback with the primary goal of, I'm going to make you feel bad. Because there's really not much you can do with that. And chances are you're going to be interacting with someone again in the future. So thinking about what went wrong, trying to explain what happened from my perspective and how I see, here are some things that did not go well. And here's advice let's not have this happen again. Let's try to, this worked, but it stressed everybody out. Can you think of a way that we can do something differently? So focusing on what's the action that the person who's receiving the feedback can take, and remembering that much of the time it's information that's from our perspective or something we observed someone doing, and that we have a subjective interpretation of what happened. That doesn't mean necessarily that somebody's going to look at the same situation and go, I did something wrong and you did something right, and they'd see it the reverse. But just the goal of giving feedback is to give somebody something actionable and to help the other person understand why you see it as a problem to be fixed.
Yeah. So I'm not ignoring you, Claire,
I
but
know, Kyle.
I'm going to say my thing because I want you to wrap it up because
Oh, do you?
have
Okay.
done this for a living. Just this one question. Yeah, I'm with Chad on the humor front. I try to focus on the thing, not the person,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, like the details of it, and just try to kind of joke around and put them at ease first and build them up a little bit first. Talk about what you did like, and don't be disingenuous about it, and and then stick the knife in them. It's like just honest feedback the whole way through. So these are some of the things I liked. And then this section over here, did you want people to actually use it, or did you just want them to see this and run away screaming? I don't do that, but just questions. Because you don't and it depends on where they're at in the process of creating something. It's like, am I getting ahead of them? Am I delivering the kind of feedback they want right now? Like, what type of feedback have they been soliciting? Am I just walking in and just generally telling them what I think? Or are they asking me, what do I think of the content that's going to be on the homepage and the general layout of where that content's going to go? And I fire back, well, I don't like the fonts and I don't like the colors. It's like, no, we did it in balsamic. This is a sketch. This is a wireframe. It's going to look different. So, yeah, it's like, okay, what are they asking for? What are they looking for? What's appropriate in the moment? How do I disarm them a little bit, get them relaxed, and then deliver it in a way that's not going to crush their spirit? So, speaking of crushed spirits, Claire.
Are you saying my spirit?
Wow.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
Claire was my consult manager for years, the only one I ever had.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
which
you
was
know-
in writing. I had
Yeah.
contractually obligated for her to suffer for 12 years.
He did.
So
And he's already told us how, open he is to feedback.
Yeah, loves it all the time.
yes.
Really, I didn't have too many.
So how do you deliver that?
Well, I think the attitude or the perspective I tend to adopt is by telling someone the truth, you're actually doing them a favor, right? Because if they don't know that what they're doing is disruptive or not maybe helping the team or whatever the case may be, they don't even have an opportunity to try and change it. So you're really doing them a favor by just being honest with them. And if I had tough messages to deliver, and I obviously don't as much anymore in my new role here, but as a consult manager, it happened more frequently than one would like, right? Like, we're all nice people. People don't love to have to give bad news to people or give them feedback that may be less than favorable. But I would think about it and make sure that I was presenting it objectively. It wasn't a personal attack. It's never personal. And Kyle, you can maybe attest to this. I tend to use like a lot of I statements too, or talk about ways I could empathize with the behavior or the situation, and then maybe even discuss things that if it were appropriate that I had done maybe to try to change similar behaviors, or talk them through. But always too asking what they thought of that. Like, okay, here's the feedback. How do you feel about it? What do you think? And getting their perspective as well.
I think the the existing relationship makes a difference.
Mhm.
And so I never felt like you were giving me the feedback. Like it was, you were harping on me about something. It was, the situation is this, like this, yeah, this is what I've done. This is what I've run into. But never, like you never slam the door. You never, like, it never felt like you were coming after me or making it personal. So that
That's
worked well.
good. That's good to know.
Yeah. Well, I see all the negative things about you behind your back usually. So,
I know, I'm aware.
well, I don't think I traditionally take negative feedback very well. I just don't.
That's not abnormal. I think, I also think I go into it expecting the person on the receiving end to get defensive. I think expecting that is probably the route to go, but it's not being flustered or afraid to still give the feedback, expecting the defensiveness, right? And I think it's just a plus or a positive when the person on the receiving end isn't defensive, and they want to know more, and are internalizing it and trying to figure out how to make things better. But going into it expecting defensiveness or expecting them to not receive it well generally has worked pretty well, because then, that's, if you're expecting the worst, everything above that or anything other than that is, really nice.
I'm happy I didn't disappoint you. You got your expected.
You didn't always get too defensive, Kyle.
Now, how do you handle feedback?
Better than I used to, I would say. I think one of the ways that has been really useful is exactly, Claire, what you said. Just remembering that if something I'm doing isn't working, I can't change it unless either I realize it, or more often than not, like someone else tells me, we need you to change. So it's looking at feedback as, here is a way of getting a piece of helpful information. It doesn't mean that I'm bad. It doesn't mean that everything I've done or how I've acted previously is worthless and throw it in the trash. It's just, hey, here's a quick checkup. Like, it's like going to the dentist. Like, you might have cavities. Like, okay, well, if you have cavities, then let's fill them. I think also trying to keep in mind, especially when I get like specific feedback, which I think is the best type of feedback, especially if it's critical, understanding that it's useful to have because that is helping me grow further. Like, I think a comparison would be, if we have a production incident at one of our clients and something happens, we resolved it, and then at the end, typically there's a post-mortem or a retro, where we kind of talk about how did that go, what worked, what didn't work. If the nature of having a post-mortem is not necessarily a bad thing. It might include, here are things that we messed up, but if you encounter similar situations, you're given an opportunity to continue to refine your responses. So it's just, not only is it not personal, but it's also helping you continue to grow and continue to move forward. You're never going to be in a position where you're never going to get critical feedback. And so the goal is more just, hey, can I get different critical feedback than before? So we're not having the same conversation over and over again.
But what a great vehicle, right? A retro like that, because it's a public forum, and you have to explain things. You have to talk about the behaviors, and it's not personal, right? Like it's you as a team a lot of times, and it may be more than one person that's receiving at that point.
And it's understanding that, I might have messed up. We might have messed up. The software might have messed up. Something happened. We can't go back in time and change that. And so framing it in terms of, how do I move forward? That's that's the mindset I try to keep in mind when I'm receiving feedback, that I might feel terribly about something I did.
Mhm.
I can't go back in time and fix that. So how can I change my behavior, change what I do, or um, in response to a specific scenario, make amends for that? Because yeah, I don't have time travel powers yet. I'm trying very
Oh.
hard, but no luck so far.
So Chad, the possibly one or two times in your entire career that somebody may have given you negative feedback,
Yeah, I
how
was
did
just
you
trying
take it?
I was just trying to think of what that could possibly have been. I don't know.
What about cases when you have maybe received feedback that you disagreed with?
Oh, that's pretty. Yeah, I have gotten that once or twice, right? Where um, it's hard to think. It's like one of those situations where you always come up with the perfect zinger as you're walking away from a conversation. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like when I get feedback that I disagree with, I'm like, I usually just listen, like, okay, okay, okay. And then the minute the conversation is over, I'm like, well, wait a second. And I've gotten really good at just letting things go, right? Like, if the intent of the message was to convey hurt feelings, which is, valid, or if it's something else, great. But if it's like, I don't know, like we give feedback constantly in what we do, like in my job for code reviews, like that is
Yeah.
constant,
Yep.
constant daily feedback. And um, that's where I, usually I mean, if something's incorrect, it's incorrect. And we just, that's not necessarily make it negative feedback. That's just, you know, technical specs or whatever. Um, that's where, but if there's something where like I see patterns that require a conversation that might be a little chilly, the biggest thing is one, always, always, always do it privately. Two, um, try to make it comfortable and not like, I don't know. I don't even know like how to phrase it. Like, do you guys remember like in the 80s and 90s? Well, I wasn't around for the 80s software development experience, but in the 90s, early 2000s, like there were some like old school managers who their way of giving feedback was to walk into a room and start yelling, right?
Yep.
I've had
Yeah.
chairs thrown at me. Do not recommend that as a form of
No.
feedback. Um, anymore.
Unless you want to get a chair thrown back at you.
Well,
if you're-
Or unless you're working in professional wrestling.
Yeah.
yes.
right.
And only then it can be a folding chair.
But like I mean, if you've been around for decades, you've probably seen something like that. Like, and that to me right now is just like comical. Like if anybody yelled at me right now, I'd probably start chuckling, right? Like
Yeah.
what are you doing? You're embarrassing yourself by getting
Right.
this mad at this, whatever, right? When I give feedback on retros for folks, right? Like we do annual retros, and depending on who it is, one of the questions is always like areas for improvement. And my answer for that is usually pretty consistent, depending on the experience level of whoever the retro is for, is like, we're over 45 years old now. The opportunity for us to improve was decades ago. That does not, you don't ask me that anymore, right? Like my buddy Greg, if I give that feedback all the time. No, we're not going to improve.
Is it it is not going to, or there are no opportunities? Because there's always opportunities, I think. It's just whether or not, you're past the point
The
of
concrete has set.
Yeah, exactly.
The paint
Yeah.
is dry. Like, yeah.
We've
It's
sculpted,
done.
individuals into who they are going to be. It is now up to you to
Right.
use them in the appropriate situations.
Sure.
Younger folks, I usually give, yes, I give lots of feedback if I see something that needs it. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't intentionally try to come up with things to say just for the sake of saying them. That's always
Sure.
silly.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I get that.
I think feedback needs to be delivered timely.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And if it's like a performance thing, interpersonal thing, if it's an issue that's going to be ongoing, that needs to be addressed, it's like you rip that Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
Like you can hum and haw for weeks about the perfect way to deliver the news. But lately, my favorite maxim is if you don't deal with reality, reality deals with you.
That's not bad.
I love it. It's like, yeah, you procrastinate and that drip is now a waterfall through your ceiling. Um, yeah, so you got to deal with it quickly. Like in a yearly review, that's a horrible time to bring something up that happened 8 months ago.
Absolutely.
Yes.
No, it's not even appropriate to do it.
No, feedback
Um,
timely. You are correct.
yeah. So I think that's important. There's no good way sometimes of like we all want to like kind of work it so that we're not making somebody feel bad. We're really trying hard to couch it as well as we can and use all the tricks we can so that the person doesn't feel bad. We don't want people to feel bad.
Right.
But there's just some cases where like it's got to happen. I can't not hurt you and get this done.
And I'd say, like, unless we're talking about very, very extreme cases, just giving the feedback and telling that person, here's how we can support you in continuing to make positive changes. That it's not, it too oftentimes giving feedback can be, this is a one-time thing. We've had the conversation. Now we're done. Like, no, what actually is more beneficial long term is, especially when we're talking about how people are in relationships with each other. Like, how do you follow up on this so that it's not, hey, here's bad news, now you're on your own?
I think we have this rigid thinking. Like if you're sculpting something out of granite, that's kind of a one and done. There's not really putting big chunks back. If you went too deep with the chisel, but we're working with clay and we're molding it and shaping it and trying to get it to that point. And we screw up but it's like, then it's ready. And then you bake it in the kiln. And then Chad isn't going to change now because he's of that age where he's baked. Yeah. And now it's
No,
like,
we're all
yeah.
more like sourdough starters.
There you go.
yeah,
Like, you can keep adding to it, you can take stuff away.
Exactly.
You're gonna get funkier over time and it'll be harder to change maybe, but
yeah.
it's possible.
One thing I think is sometimes letting people discover,
Yes.
like guide them through, talk about it, have the conversation, like holding it up and going, well, okay, I was asking about this and this, and the problem is like you're putting the problem right in front of their face
Mhm.
and then asking them questions until they see it. And they're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, that button is like, that's all wrong. Wait a minute, I got to fix that. So I guess that's one way to trick people.
True.
Another part in terms of kind of giving people the space to be comfortable, giving people the space to process the information. Like, Claire, can you talk about like how often when you've needed to give critique or constructive feedback, how often do you expect a response like right away from somebody?
Well, I was actually just thinking about this. I mean, in that role of our consultant manager specifically, and I've been in other roles where it's been different, but there were a lot of times I was delivering someone else's feedback, which absolutely is the entire situation. And that's much easier, frankly, because then you become more of the mediator between those two things. But I still think, regardless of whether it's my own or someone else's feedback, I mean, asking them how they think about that and giving them an opportunity to respond, because if I'm giving them some sort of feedback that maybe a behavior I've noticed, and sometimes it's something that's just blatantly accurate, and sometimes it's a perception, right? So, hey, and I'll talk about it in those terms. You know, this is the perception that your behavior is giving off. Tell me more. And I tried, I hope, Kyle, to give the person a chance to tell their side, essentially, right? So maybe not defensively, but at least ask more questions around, you know, how it came about, depending on what it was, right? Like, again, there's some things that are just blatant, you know, blatantly accurate. And then there's other things that maybe have nuances to them that I would try to explore, because maybe I didn't trying to understand, right? So seeking to understand the situation would be the way I would go at that, I think. I don't know if I answered your question now.
No, it's totally fair. And I think that makes sense. And I think that's something that anybody who's receiving feedback can remember, that that conversation is an opportunity for us to ask questions, understand more, like, how did this come up? How was it perceived versus how do I perceive it, versus what are maybe more black and white things, like, you know, stop stealing from the company. Like, okay, all right, yeah, that's a little less negotiable. But I also know one thing that I've found about myself over the years is that it's kind of a version, Chad, of I thought of the zinger on the way out the door, but it's that, okay, I need to sit with this feedback for a bit, even if it's just like half an hour or something, just so that I can kind of contextualize it better and come up with my own understanding of, like, here are the things that I need to change, and bring that back to whoever gave me the feedback. I'm not necessarily as strong in the moment when I get feedback, like, oh, cool, yes, I'm absolutely fine with this, I'm going to do XYZ, this will never happen again. Like, it is much more, I need some time to process. So I think Claire, you absolutely address that, especially in terms of thinking about, okay, the person who's receiving feedback, ask questions. It should not be a declarative conversation.
No, so I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I think as someone receiving it, absolutely, you should ask for clarification, you know, and if the person giving the feedback isn't giving examples, for instance, I think it's perfectly acceptable to ask for examples. And great when people do that. And if you have them, right, you should absolutely give them if you're the one giving the feedback. So
I do that a lot. Like, if I were in a situation, I'll just, usually, in my way of doing that is usually, what the hell are you talking about? Right? Great way to do exactly what you just said. Very effective.
yeah.
I look at, you know, asking those questions, and what that really tells me is this needs to happen as a conversation. Like, you got to be careful. Like, if you just give the feedback without the background, without, you know, you're basically throwing a stun grenade at them, and they're like, okay. And then you're telling their imaginations to run wild because they don't have anything to go on. They just heard that, oh, I hate it. Okay.
Yep.
So even if somebody, like, asks for feedback via text or via email, or that way, if it's bad and you know there needs to be a conversation around it, like, don't, hold off until you can have that in-person conversation, because then you don't give them a chance to ruminate on it, for their imagination to run wild. But know that when you kind of drop the bomb on them, they're going to need a few seconds with it and need to react to it, and their face might turn red and steam might come out of their ears. But it's all like, and going into that situation, the feedback should be accurate. It should be necessary. It, like, and it should be something that they can act on. Like, if there's nothing they can do about it and it doesn't really matter, it's not really going to help,
Yeah.
Oh,
then
That's-
sometimes it's like, do you really need to even hammer on them about it? Or
if someone's actually going to take, as a receiver, right? If someone is actually going to take the time to give you feedback, I think the way, and I'm sure when I was younger, I probably didn't receive feedback as well as I hopefully do now. But I tend to take a look at it and go, listen, if they were willing to spend the time to actually give me the feedback, there's probably, whether I agree with all of it or not, there's probably a grain of truth in there somewhere, right? So
Right.
I dig through because otherwise, I mean, no one's going to blatantly spend, unless they're really just maniacal and mean, they're not going to take the time to give you negative feedback or tell you something maybe somewhat unpleasant about you or the situation, if there's not some grain of truth. So whether it's 100% accurate or not, I think I always look at it as there's something in there.
So if you're gathering feedback to give to somebody else, so you are the what's the word for it? You're just you're a node in the telephone line between those two people.
Yeah.
You're just repeating what the computer says, and like, you kind of need to anticipate some of those questions and dig in a little deeper.
Mhm.
I just wanted to pass along this so and so hates everything you do.
Exactly.
Well,
Have a good day.
it's also worthwhile to have an understanding if, like, let's say if I'm the mediator between people, like you mentioned, Kyle, like, why can't those two people have this conversation? Like,
Yes.
get a good understanding. Okay, in this case, having a mediator is unavoidable. One person is always busy, or one person is, otherwise occupied, and it makes sense to hear it from a mediator. Like, because as much as possible, if we can reduce the game of telephone, let's reduce the game of telephone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So-
get a little obstinate when someone delivers me feedback on behalf of somebody else and say things like, hey, if they have a problem, have them come talk to me directly. And now I don't know how mature that is, but
Well,
like,
I mean, so
it bothers me though that someone's like, oh, make sure, tell so-and-so that, like, it's like they're getting out of something and you can't ask them questions and confront your accuser.
yeah, but I mean, what we do or what you guys do, right, as a firm, it makes that interesting because there is that, people, there's a lot of people that'll will avoid just giving feedback at all if it's negative, because that's a conflict, but people by and large just want to be nice people and want to avoid that kind of stuff. So as consultants, we're not, you guys aren't employed by our customers. So is it really the customer's role or job to actually give you that feedback, or can they use that third party, right? So our industry makes that kind of a little interesting. What I'd actually like to understand from you guys is, how often have you actually gotten feedback directly from a customer that maybe was a bit unpleasant? I mean, you guys have all been consultants for years.
Me? Never.
Oh, that's right. You haven't gotten any feedback. Wait, how did you fix that, Al? Maybe it had something, didn't agree.
Yeah.
You didn't agree with feedback.
I mean, it happens fairly regularly. Not negative feedback, right? But like, there's so many feedback loops built into how we develop software nowadays. And additional layers of feedback loops built into how SDG manages, the relationships with our consultants and our clients and everything else. So there's endless opportunities to provide feedback, and folks tend to take advantage of those, on, I was going to say on occasion. No, frequently. Like, so in our projects, agile projects, we have retros. All that is a big feedback loop. Hey, give feedback on good things, bad things, and what we're going to change. Baked into our consultant roles, we specifically ask clients for feedback on folks, on occasion. Well, I do. You know, I give a list of 10 people on my retro. Here, ask these people how I'm doing. Whatever, this one guy, don't care what he says, but ask him anyway. I don't actually do that, but the opportunity to gather feedback, provide it, and absorb it is plentiful. And to your point, Claire, yes, that is almost always delivered by the third party. So I have meetings with lots of folks that I will ask directly, like, how are we doing? How are things going? Can you give us, like, is there something you're not seeing from us that you should? Like, that's baked into what I do, not like at a team level, but on a like product or program level. Like, how are we doing? Are you getting the outputs from us that you want to get? Mm-hmm. Is there something that we can show you more clear? Like, tell us, right?
Do you think that, I think this is a rhetorical question, but do you think that proactively asking for the feedback minimizes any negative impact? I think it would. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it gives them the opportunity to clarify what might have been negative feedback and for you to explain why, you know, I'll give a great example, like status of a specific product, you know, in a sprint or whatever. Like how far have we come and how much is left and all the timeline related stuff. Sometimes you can deliver that message in a way that doesn't really resonate with agile people, right? Like, and non-agile in this, like people that aren't familiar with the agile process, or people that aren't familiar with how software products get built. Right. Lots of opportunities there to say, hey, all right, if this doesn't make sense, what kind of visualization, what kind of data, what kind of whatever can I give you to help you understand where this is or why this is in the state that it is? I don't know. I'm sure you all have very similar.
Yeah, just the proactive communication is huge. Claire, exactly like what you said, it minimizes the negative impact because you're giving people the opportunity to share feedback earlier, which generally means there's been less time for rumination or resentment to build. I think as consultants, I would be concerned if my customer gave feedback through my parent company that I didn't at least sense from working there. Yep. 'Cause that's just kind of emotional IQ or just, yep, am I able to take the temperature of the quality of my work? Like that disconnect would be very concerning to me because it means that I have a blind spot that I haven't been paying attention to.
Sure.
I will say there have been times when I've received negative feedback that, like through a third party, that I would say, again, circles back to needing to understand the context. So there have been situations where I have done work, I've completed work, it met the requirements that I was given, and then after the fact, it was revealed, oh, you didn't need someone with my skills to begin with. You actually had a problem with a completely different area. And so, yeah, with that feedback, I totally understand where you're coming from, where, yeah, there was a bigger context that I wasn't aware of. And so that unhappiness is totally understandable. So I have received third-party feedback, to Chad's point, where the way working in software, particularly like Scrum-based software development works, is we're constantly getting feedback. So I wouldn't say it's never, it's always a bad sign that you get feedback through a third party, but the hope is that that's consistent with the more frequent direct feedback that you are regularly eliciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you can take the temperature down, take some of the heat out of it if maybe skip that first overall summation of the feedback. They didn't like it. Okay, take that out. Just take that part out. Just forget that. We're going to skip right to the like details. There was some questions. Can this button be bigger? Can we do this? Is this, do we have to use it? Like all of a sudden you're working with that person through these issues, and you're not putting a value judgment on them. You're not putting a value judgment on their work. It's like, oh no, they didn't like it. This sucked. So they want you to redo it. It's like, no. These are the things that came up.
Yeah.
Here they are. What can we do?
Yeah. When it's appropriate, I like that, asking questions, right? Like instead of just blatantly saying, hey, I really don't like the size of this button. I mean, you're also kind of offering a solution, but
Yeah.
so I mean, different kind of feedback loop a little bit, but I like that, asking questions.
And I think feedback, like on creative stuff, has the most emotion attached to it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, this is somebody's creative work. They
Sure.
put a lot of thought into this, and this is after working on this for X amount of time and putting this much thought into it. They took all that in and went through this creative endeavor and produced this thing that they are happy with, that they're proud of, that they're showing you. And I've seen this happen, like demos and things like that, or just a pitch about something. It's like you get the pitch and they seem so happy, that like proud of what they came up with and what they went through. And the response in the room is like, well, what about this? What about that? I gave a presentation that I worked very hard on. And the first thing I heard from was the HR director saying, well, we could have read all this on the internet. Well, you still can. It's still out there. I sifted through using my experience and, thought I grabbed the highlights and the best parts of it and gave you a kind of an executive summary.
Yeah.
But if you want to just use your time to do all that research instead of me, then more power to you. I didn't turn over the table and storm out, but I wanted to. But I think it's if you can avoid like hurt feelings, why not?
That's just it. Like I think about when I have to give critical feedback or when someone else gives critical feedback to me, and if there has been time and attention and care taken to make it, specific and constructive, and it's timely, like that nearly always strengthens my relationship with that person rather than damaging it. And there are times when we can just assume that, oh, if I say something bad, then they're going to hate me, or I'm not going to be able to move this work forward, or it's only a bad outcome. But if you have a good experience giving or receiving feedback, you are much more likely to have positive interactions with that person, which I think is important to remember.
So here's a question for you guys, because I had spinach for lunch and I almost purposely left spinach in my teeth to see if any of you would tell me.
So quickly. I wouldn't even be able to stop myself.
Okay.
Yeah. And since it's you, and since we've known each other for so long, then I would have said something like, are you missing a tooth? Or yeah. Were you out mowing the yard?
Claire, I think I gave you good feedback just yesterday, right? I was sitting in your office and I had some very specific feedback on the accommodations present.
Yep, you did.
And you took it really well. And we are going to make adjustments.
We are.
Yeah.
Those are important adjustments. Absolutely, we're going to make those.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited for the next. Well, what, 2 weeks from yesterday? I'm excited
Yeah.
for that.
Work from the office day.
That was awesome yesterday. Being
Yeah.
around people was, yeah. I was overexcited.
You should absolutely send that feedback to someone at SDG.
I'm definitely gonna send that feedback.
I hope. Yeah, that's those days are. I feel bad because I was on the phone for almost every time somebody new walked by to say hello.
Yeah, I meant
was
to talk to
on-
you about that.
About being on the
Give
phone.
you that feedback.
You should have just called him on Slack, Claire. Just
I know, right?
Yeah,
Chad.
but yeah, those days are always wonderful. Kyle, I didn't see at lunch. You could have, came in there and said, "This is why I like work from the office days." That was the specific question, right, Claire?
Yeah, yesterday was nuts for me. It was a
Oh,
crazy day. I was
here's some
running
feedback.
all over the place.
Here's some feedback, Claire.
Yeah.
I like that you reinforced my answer to why I like coming into the office. You did it like 6 times.
Chad, anytime.
Yeah,
And thank you
Yeah.
for the feedback.
you're welcome.
Now, feedback can go both ways.
Mhm.
So
Oh, totally.
if somebody's giving you feedback, you can give them feedback about their feedback.
Even
Or
how
if
they-
somebody's in a supervisory role, you can give them feedback. Like, do you know when I send you an email, if I don't hear back from you in like 2 minutes, I'm freaking out.
But that's another really good point, Kyle, because I mean, setting expectations, even as if there's ongoing follow-up with the feedback or whatever, but that's I mean, that in of itself is feedback, right? Setting expectations.
I'm just enjoying the idea in my head of just having an infinite loop of now I'm giving feedback on your feedback on your feedback, and
Right.
now I feedback on your feedback on my feedback.
has you so this got me thinking. I actually I've started to say that when you're receiving feedback, you can actually sometimes, if the situation maybe is appropriate for it, give feedback on the way the person gave the feedback.
Yep.
I know I've done that in the past with the boss.
Oh, yeah.
And just said, hey, appreciate it. Here's what you could have done a lot better. So, I mean, recognize your audience, and yeah, that's a little tougher, but
So when you're on the receiving end of negative feedback, how do you kind of prepare yourself? And if you have a chance, and what do you do if you completely disagree with it?
Breathe.
I think I end the conversation as quickly as possible and say, I appreciate you telling me that. I will think about what you've said. Have a nice day.
I do something similar. I appreciate what you said. I disagree with all of it. I'm not going to change. And so have a great day. Hang in there.
I think I'm a little bit more like Elle. I need to ruminate on the feedback a little bit.
Yeah, I usually do like okay, thanks for telling me. I need to think about this more. Let's circle back in a day or something. And then that circle back is usually like, here's my mini dissertation on why I disagree with you. Here's my evidence to the contrary. Let's see, like, what's your response to that? Like, how continuing the conversation to figure out, okay, is there a spot in the middle where we can meet?
Yeah.
If there isn't, like, how do we get some kind of resolution? But yeah, obviously there are extreme cases where it's just, yeah, I'm going to disagree with you. And sometimes that leads to, hey, I'm changing jobs, but you try to have, as healthy a conversation as possible. So you're not doing the workplace version of going to bed angry.
I usually just say that's adorable that you think that.
Yeah. I see why you could say that.
We wish
Um,
I wish I was quicker witted like you guys are.
I've had that conversation where I've said, I can see why you would think that and say that. Um, and that was it. Yeah.
So Chad, how do you mask defensiveness with humor like that? And Kyle, maybe you can answer that too. But
I don't. I mean, I don't know. I don't really. I have a problem with people calling it defensiveness or like, oh, you're being defensive or whatever, right? Like, it's not. You're just wrong, right? Like that's. And I think
That's
part of the experience with me is having built up that persona up to that point, and then being able to just say, "That's adorable," or "Do you have any other cute thoughts?" or like, "What else?" Is that
Yeah,
it? Or
it's
more
like some of it is like I think Chad that you have an ability to kind of triage like, okay, is this something I need to care about, or can I just like I think you're wrong, but we can still have a good relationships, things still get done. Is this really important to resolve at this moment? No, then okay, cool. Thanks for telling me. Next.
Yeah, or even like, was that cathartic? Was that good for you to get that off your chest? Are we
Sure.
done now?
Yeah.
Yep. Kyle, what about you?
Uh, I am truly defensive. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, that's just how I know I'm going to react. But what I try to do is educate the people around me on how to work with me. And because I've got different like foibles and whatnot. Um, when I'm really focused on something and like intensely focused, like I've got to fix something, I've got to do something that's, people are waiting for me. It's it's not that I don't love, respect, appreciate people. It's I can't actually hear you right now
Hmm.
because I'm off in my head doing something. Um, and sometimes when I get feedback, I go into that mode where it's like, yeah, he's left the building. He's now in the command processing unit of his head, like scrambling to figure out, you know, what to say, if they're right. Um, you know, so it's kind of like getting people to know like my sense of humor because
Mm-hmm.
I can be really dry. And if somebody has not been trained in how to, that I'm not serious most of the time. And if you ask me something, my immediate first answer is always going to be me trying to be funny. So wait for the second one. If they don't know me, then I got to be careful. Um, and so I hope that if I'm delivering feedback to people, I already know them and we've developed a working relationship. But you have to find your way with people. You can't,
Yep.
and everybody's different. Some people you can be just blatantly blunt, honest, and they're just gonna be like, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And other people, it's like there's no way you can say it.
Mhm.
There's nothing you can do that's not gonna set them off.
Exactly.
Which is why I think if you are in a role similar to what Claire's used to be, so in a supervisor role or in a managerial role, and you know that a potentially significant part of your job is going to be giving feedback, ask your direct reports, like, how do they like to receive feedback? Like, ask that ahead of time so that you're not trying to guess in the moment, how should I phrase this?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great tip, Al.
Elle, what's your answer to that question? How do you like to receive feedback? Negative.
I like to receive direct evidence-based feedback. So I like the truth. I don't need my hand held, but I want to understand why it's a problem. Like, give me examples. Give me the context to help me understand why someone or whoever is giving me feedback has a frowny face right now. Like, I want to know why, not just here's a problem. What
Yeah,
about you, Chad. Oh, Kyle. Yeah, go.
Oh, I was just going to say that I always like it from the source. I don't like the telephone game. I don't like arguing through somebody with somebody else. But it depends on if it's a creative endeavor or if it's just a mistake. Something didn't work right, something broke, bad code. Like that's not going to make me feel bad. But if it's like personal choice went into it, thought went into it, creativity went into it, then it's like I want to run away from all the feedback and hide and just hope it blows over. But in those cases, I want to focus on detailed improvement and not a overall value judgment.
Chad?
At happy hour, after a couple of drinks, tell me then.
One of these days, we're going to get through a podcast where we don't mention happy hour.
I don't think so. I think it actually, you should make sure that it's always mentioned, and then people have to find it.
It'll become a drinking game
Exactly.
that people will play at happy hour. Drink.
But last but not least, Claire, how do you like to receive
I don't
feedback?
know. I mean, I was thinking I'm kind of where Chad is at, right? Like I'm that piece of granite versus clay. And I think I am pretty attuned to where my blind spots are. And so it's been a while, I think. But Elle, I'm kind of like with you. I mean, I'd like it to be direct for one. Like I'm not, I'm not going to wither away if you tell me that you don't like something I did or whatever. But yeah, so direct, private. I think that's important. I don't want to be called out in front of a group of people. But yeah, direct and hopefully kind. I mean, I don't want you to be mean about it.
Yeah.
It can be a conversation, but I'd prefer either face-to-face or at least a telephone conversation too.
Awesome. I think those are some good parting thoughts.
Awesome.
As we'll wind down and say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.